Welcome everybody to Occupy LSX. Wonderful to see how many people are running around this afternoon. My name's Jon Witterick, as I say. What I'm going to be doing is just trying to look into what is money, how it's created, and really the most important thing, rather than saying what's wrong with society, is actually try and work out how do we put it right. I think that's probably the most important thing. How do we actually sort the problems out? Why have we got the problems we've got at the moment? And what we're going to do about it. See, as it says on here, basically don't believe anything I say. Okay, I might just be some nutter that's got in, and what I would say is that anything I say that you're not sure about, or anything that you think, oh, that can't be right, do look into it. We've got some fantastic resources on the internet now. So what I'm trying to do is just perhaps open people's minds up. And some of the stuff I say is apparently controversial. I've upset a few barristers recently, and which is fair enough. I believe they work for the banking system. I believe the City of London is the banking system. And I think that its control isn't just over this country. I think its control is pretty well over the whole planet. But that's my personal view, and I might be wrong. So have we got any bankers here from here? Fantastic. Good on you. So, yeah. So it's going to be controversial, I promise you that. Okay. And the other thing I say, I nicked this from Jordan Maxwell, who's a brilliant researcher. He was looking into all this sort of stuff in the 60s in America. And he says, I'm not an authority on anything because at least I'm smart enough to know how much I don't know. And that's what I do. I've got my own views. What I'll be doing, I'll be taking questions at the end. Okay, so I'll be talking about 3/4 of an hour. What I do is keep it really simple. Okay, because what I don't want to do is start, economics can get very, very confusing. And what I try and do is just like cut out the, cut out all the complexity and just try and explain it really simply for everyone. So, if there is a single issue, what I'm going to say is, and the big issue is, and it's almost like a politician's catchphrase, but I think what we've got to think about is, if there is an issue, who issues the money? Okay? Because when we actually realize how money is created, most people, we're not taught this at school. We don't actually think about how's money created. Well, it's actually quite interesting. I mean, what I'm going to be doing is doing an analogy with Monopoly. Because when I started researching the game of Monopoly, I realised, apart from a few slight differences, it's actually remarkably similar. Our current economic system is like a game of Monopoly. And we all know about Monopoly, it's quite simple. But anyway, we say, who issues the money? Sorry, it's a bit noisy. Who issues the money? Well, why doesn't our government issue the money? Our government does actually issue some money. Does anyone know how much money our government issues? Anyone on the ball here? No, sir? Yes, sir. You have to shout. As a percentage? A third. A third. It's actually 3%. Our government actually creates 3% of the money supply. It creates pound coins, notes, basically everything that you can put in your pocket or your wallet, that's what it creates. And that is debt-free money, effectively, because we don't have to pay interest on it. And we get it for free, effectively. We have to work, obviously, to exchange our goods. However, when you go to a bank and ask for a loan, they're not giving you a loan. You might think that it's other people's savings or it's pensions and things like that, but they're not actually giving you a loan. They're creating it on a computer keyboard. So a few little taps to the keyboard, bang, they're creating it, which wouldn't be a problem apart from there's no limit to how much they can create. Well, there is a limit. It's called fractional reserve banking. Basically means that if they've got £100, they can lend between 7, 8, 9, I think might be going down a little bit since the Basel II agreement, but they can lend money without that they don't actually own, which is crazy. Now the other thing is, not only do when they create money, they give us, they give us what they call a loan. It's not a loan. It's actually being created. What they do is they want interest on it, which is fair enough, I suppose. However, the problem is that interest doesn't exist. It's not there. And so we're always going to be a little bit short. What I try and do is I make it really, really simple. Okay, I've got a bag here with 10 marbles in it, and this is so that I understand it, because I get it really simple. Now, 2, 4, 6, 8. Oh bloody! Oh no, there's one in there. Sorry, there's one in there. I keep thinking I've lost my marbles. Some people have said that. Okay, 10 marbles. Okay, what I'm going to do, no tricks here. I'm going to put 10 marbles into a bag. Right. Right, there are now 10 marbles in that bag. Is there anyone here who can get 11 marbles out of this bag? We got any magicians or anything like that? No. There is only 10 marbles. Any child knows the 11th marble simply doesn't exist. It can't exist. It doesn't exist. And that is what I believe happens with the banking system. They create money and then they want interest on it. But that interest doesn't exist. And I believe the problem actually happens the problem actually happens is that, well, two things have to happen. Because there's never enough money to pay back these, this loan effectively, not a loan, this created money, two things happen. The money supply has to grow exponentially. And of course, as the money supply grows, so the debt grows, because money is created as debt. The other thing, of course, happens is that countries, companies, and individuals will default. They have to, because there's never enough to go around. There's a very good professor called Jim Bendel who did a TED talk, and he explained it in a very similar way, very simple. He said, imagine a little village somewhere where everyone's trading with each other. No money. They've got chickens, there's a farmer, there's a school teacher. And what they do, they all just exchange their goods. But it's a bit of a pain because, if they want to buy something, they actually have to carry a chicken round with them or a dozen eggs or whatever. So one day, a knight came along, probably a Knights Templar actually, funnily enough, since we were in the city of London. And this knight said, look, what I'll do, I'll give you all these special tokens, okay? I'll give you these tokens, and everyone will have 12 tokens. And, you can actually, so instead of actually carrying chickens and eggs around, what you can do is exchange these tokens. Everyone thought, brilliant, makes it a lot easier. But what he also says is, at the end of the year, I want 13 back. Okay? Now, of course, everyone, suddenly, whereas everyone used to trade with each other, everyone's now a little bit fearful because they know that sooner or later, that person that doesn't pay back their, somebody hasn't got 13, it's like musical chairs. When you take chairs away, someone's going to end up on the floor. Okay? So, what actually happens is the person that doesn't pay it back, they lose all their goods. They effectively go bankrupt. And the knight, I mean, it's a fantastic money-making system. And that is what I think is the crux of the matter. Okay? So, anyway, what I'm going to do, it's funny enough that Monopoly is still the world's #1 board game, isn't it? Still, in these crazy times, it's almost like we fantasize about having money and having lots of hotels and banks, and it's remarkable. There's a nice little graphic of the Monopoly. And what I'm also going to be doing is talking about if you're in a situation where default is obvious. For countries, we're seeing this now. And what they're doing with all these countries like Greece and whatever, it's mad, isn't it? Because what they're saying is, if you're in debt, the way you get out of it is, we'll lend you more money. I mean, how crazy is that? If you've got a friend of yours that's, maxed out all their credit cards, is lending them more money going to solve the problem? I don't think so. I don't think so personally. And I've been in that situation where I ended up in quite a bit of debt. And that's why I started looking at all this. So, first of all, we've got to realise that monopoly, like life, is a game. Okay, don't take it too seriously. Now you think, well, you know, what happens if I lose my house and my children starve and whatever? Yeah, it's pretty serious. But you know, if you talk to a Buddhist, they'll say it's all illusion. And it's a wonderful, wonderful way of exploring who we are. And so at one level, you know, don't take it too seriously. It's an amazing, you know, this reality, whatever this reality is, it's a wonderful tool for actually our growth on a lot of different levels. But let's not get too philosophical here. So there's our little monopoly man. And I believe the banking system, and I might be wrong, and as I say, I'll be open for questions at the end, but I believe the banking system, along with the government, is out to take us for every penny we've got. And our plan is to stop them. And there's a number of different ways we can do that, I believe. But we think about, you know, we've got to have cuts, don't we? We've got to have cuts because we're good. Well, I'd say we're sovereigns, but some people say we're citizens, or you know. But I say, you know, we're good people. Now, they say, well, we've got to have cuts because we've got to reduce the deficit. Well, at the end of the day, the national debt, and I'll be talking about this in a few moments, national debt stands about 1.1 trillion. Now, get onto the Bank of England website and have a look at how much money is in circulation. I think it's the M2 and M3 money supply. You can look at all that, you know, 3% of all the money that's in circulation in notes and everything that's deposited in bank accounts. Now, the unfortunate thing is that it doesn't matter how many cuts we have, that money can't be paid back. There isn't enough money in circulation to pay off our national debt. So, from that, I believe that every politician that goes up and says, well, we've got to have, you know, we've got to have cuts and we've got to, you know, get rid of nurses and, you know, put limits on spending, and students now end up in £30,000 to £40,000 debt just to get an education. I mean, it's crazy. And I believe that all those politicians are actually either misinformed or lying or a bit of both. Because the debt can't be paid back. And we're trying to reduce the deficit. Well, why have we got a deficit? But let's go on to that in a bit. Their biggest control they have over us, for those that can't see the slide, is fear. Okay? If you default, you're in trouble. Credit rating, you won't be able to get a mobile phone unless you just go pay as you go. So there's this whole thing about, you know, you're going to have bailiffs at the door, you're going to have debt collectors after you. It's not actually that frightening because you can actually have some fun once you're in debt. Because I found out about this, it looks like you have as well. So anyway, I digress. Now, I believe that you have a token to play the game. Okay? Now, in Monopoly, it's not you actually on the board, is it? It is in Twister. If anyone's played Twister, it's actually you getting on the board and you're actually playing the game. With Monopoly, it's not you playing the game. You're making the decisions, but you've got a little token, you move along. And if suddenly it says, go to prison, you say, whoa, I don't want to play anymore. Yeah, I've had it, or, you know. So, now what's interesting is if you have a look at a credit card and you know, if anyone's got a credit card on them, do feel free to get them out and look at them. If anyone's got a credit card, can you notice where your name is? It's always in uppercase. If anyone's got a credit card or a debit card where their name isn't in all capital letters, interesting use of the word capital, but let's not digress too much. It's always in uppercase. Now, if it's not in uppercase on a bank statement, you'll actually have something like Mr., Mrs. or Miss, which is a title. Now, where else do we get the word title? Title is who owns you. I'm trying to cover quite a sort of like complex topic here, but I'm going to have to like brush over it because I spend the whole hour just talking about this one thing. But it's actually quite remarkable. Because on the back of your credit card, it will say authorized signature. Well, who are you authorizing if it's not yourself? And also, when you actually start looking at, I think it's Black's Law Dictionary, you've actually got things like, it goes in Roman, where you've got capitis diminutio maxima, is defined meaning a maximum loss of status through the use of capitalization. And it's interesting, the word capitalization and capital letters. This occurs when a man's condition was changed from one of freedom to one of bondage. Now, my understanding is that when you're a child, your parents register you, don't they, with a birth certificate. So you've got to be registered. Does anyone know what the word register, where it comes from? It comes from regis, and register means to hand one's title to the crown. So the Queen owns you. No, the crown isn't the Queen. The crown is the City of London. So, when you actually look into the legal definition of a person isn't a human being. A legal definition of a person is actually a corporation. So I believe what they're doing is creating a, if you like, a corporation in our name so that they can trade with us. And I believe that that is our take. There's plenty on the internet. There's a really good little YouTube video called Meet Your Straw Man. Okay? And if it's anything you want to look into, it's only a short video, but it actually explains it. Meet Your Straw Man. Do have a look at it. Right, and this is where we get into the fun part of it. The currency used is just totally worthless paper. Okay? So there's your monopoly money. Now, in monopoly money, the currency used in monopoly, you can actually buy hotels and houses, and you can bribe, you can pay your tax and whatever you community charge or whatever it is on the monopoly board. Now, what's the difference between the money in monopoly and the money that we have in our global financial system? There's one big difference. In monopoly, there's no interest. So you've got a pretty well fixed money supply. There is a change. I've gone through the rules of monopoly. I had to do a lot of research for this talk. But if you look at in monopoly, sometimes the bank goes broke, but I'm going to be going on to that. It's remarkable how similar it is to real life. But as I say, money is created under fractional reserve banking. They can lend out, just by going onto a computer keyboard, about 7 or 8 times more than they actually have. So we all know that if we all went to the bank, all went to the cash point and withdrew their money straight away, the banks would collapse. In fact, we had a run on a bank fairly recently with Northern Rock. And it also happened in Iceland as well. So what you can realise is the money, they actually haven't got any money to give us. So they're creating that money, literally out of thin air or on a computer. But the difficulty is that they want interest back on it. And of course, the interest doesn't exist. And that is the problem. Because we're always going to have a shortage. There's always going to be massive debts. Because we're all scrabbling around trying to pay this interest. Now, if they didn't inflate the money supply, then the game would have been over ages ago. So they have to continually, 2 things happen. They inflate the money supply, and people, countries and companies either go bankrupt or, like Greece, where they're having to borrow more money or be bailed out by other countries. Well, they create more money and it all sloshes around. And the chap that he's earlier, he spoke very well, but he was talking about a graph, how, up until, I think the 1970s, through the 1800s, the money supply was very sort of limited. And then in the 70s, it started going up. And then in the last 10 years, it's basically just going up exponentially. Now, if you think, what was a pound to begin with? Does anyone know? What was a pound based on? Silver, that's correct. Because it's a pound, it's based on sterling. So a pound, originally, when they created the pound, it was actually a pound of sterling silver. Now you think it's, I don't know how many ounces there are in a pound, but I know that silver's, it's a bit over £30 an ounce, is it, at the moment? I haven't been looking. Does anyone know what the silver price is? But anyway, sorry? Oh, right, £21, so it's gone down a little bit recently. So, you realise that our money has devalued, because every time they print more money and bring it into circulation, it makes the actual, anyone that's got money in the bank effectively that they've saved, that money goes down. If you double the money supply, you're halving the value of the money. And that's what I believe is essentially what causes inflation. It's actually the money supply. Okay, so what else has monopoly got to do with... oh, there we go. There's Ben Bernanke at the Federal Reserve printing dollars. I just love that image. Oh, and of course now, for all your kids, just to get them hooked on credit cards long before, you know, that they need to, there's now electronic monopoly. And instead of all that, you know, paper, you know, you've actually got credit cards. And so you can get your kids using plastic before they're even old enough to get a credit card. I mean, it's crazy. I really think so. Now, what's interesting is that in monopoly, if you read the rules of monopoly, the bank never goes broke. Because in monopoly, I don't know if anyone's played monopoly where the banks actually run out of money because the rest of the players got too much of it. What happens in that situation is you just get a normal piece of paper and you tear it up into little squares and you put 10, 20, 50, 100, whatever, and the banker uses that. So even in monopoly, they bail out the banks. It's quite remarkable. And there you've got a little cartoon of what do you mean you need a bailout? And there's a banker there with piles of money. So it is crazy. It is crazy. Now, it's only the small banks that need bailing out because they're lending money they haven't got and they're doing it totally irresponsibly. But the big banks, all the money, you know, the Barclays, well, even Barclays took, I think, 10 billion of our taxpayers' money. So, I mean, it's crazy. But the really big players, the Goldman Sachs and the JP Morgans, they're the ones that always benefit from this. So, what I believe is their plan is to take you for every penny you've got, and your plan is to stop them. So, and I believe you stand a better chance of, of winning the game if you understand the rules. And I say, I've got a website where, it's now a community website. So we've got a big forum, we've got over 10,000 people signed up, and what we're doing, we're challenging the banks in a number of ways. I'll sort of go into this. Now, I believe being in debt is one of the consequences of playing the game. And that's why our government is in debt, because money is created as debt. I know that in certain times, they've actually got themselves free of the banking system. I think it was Abraham Lincoln, actually, you're nodding your head, it sounds good. He actually created the greenback. So he was creating his own government debt-free money. But of course, then the Federal Reserve comes along and says, and do look at how the Federal Reserve was created. It's much more difficult to see what's going on with the Bank of England, which is supposed to be nationalised. I don't believe it was nationalised. I believe it's a private independent company working for the City of London, but not everyone might agree with me. But just go and do your research. But the Federal Reserve, basically, they just hijacked the US Treasury. Remember in cowboy films, you'd see people with like US Treasury written on them. Well, the US Treasury, all it does is produce the notes and coins. It doesn't actually produce the actual currency anymore. That's private banks who are doing it, creating money out of thin air and charging interest on it, which I believe it's that simple. And I believe as the 99%, it should be us, under our government actually producing the money debt-free for us. Okay? And just remember, it's only a game. My goodness. It would be that during my talk. Right. Should we give them a second just to pass? The secret to winning the game for everyone is to assume a deficiency of love in your opponent and apply some. So when you get debt collectors round or anything like that, the important thing is that you don't, you're not rude to them, because it could be your brother or sister. Okay? So, the idea is that we're trying to set an example here where we're going to act lawfully, honourably and truthfully. You know, this isn't about sort of like getting out of debt and not paying your debts because you can't afford to, not because you don't want to. I'm saying that, you know, if you borrowed the money then and you can afford to pay it back. But there are people who are always going to be, there's always going to be that shortfall because they're creating money and not actually creating the interest. So, first of all, if you do find yourself in debt and you're having problems, the first thing to do is don't bank with the same people that, you know, if you have problems paying your mortgage off, get yourself a separate bank account because they will steal money from your current account to pay off your credit card or your mortgage. So that's worth being aware of. And what we would say, now there are websites now who are actually dealing with mortgages. Did you know about this, Hannah, when you put me at this time? Right. So, never mind. It's just lots of people making a bit of a noise. Not every day we get 100 motorbikes go past, revving up and pushing their hooters. So anyway, what I did, I ended up in debt, and when I ended up in debt, I was actually really fearful. I was crapping myself, honestly, because I was getting these debt collectors phoning up. And I thought the bailiffs are going to come round and steal everything. And once I actually looked into it and the money supply and how money is created, and once I realised that, hang on, debt is you know, I had a successful business for many years, and a business transaction went very wrong. I ended up in, you know, suddenly from earning money in employing people, I actually went to being in a lot of debt. So I was trying to figure it out myself. And it's only when I actually started thinking about, I read a book by a lady called Mary Elizabeth Croft, and it's called How, oh dear, I can't remember what it is called now. It's on the website, there's a link to it. How I Clobbered Every Cash Confiscatory Bureau Known to Man. In brackets, it's a spiritual economics book. Because what it's doing, it's about taking back our power away from the banking system. It's the, you know, they're not even the 1%, they're the 1% of the 1%. And we're the 99.999. But the 99%, for, you know, what it's called, we have to take back our power of creating money. And so what we want is a government to create money for us on our behalf, but interest-free. Now, they could create 1.1 trillion pounds overnight and pay off the national debt. And then we wouldn't be having to have all these cuts and, you know, reductions to our services and worry about our pensions and things like that. They could do that overnight. There are two presidents, or one of them actually was successful. I mentioned this earlier. Abraham Lincoln actually produced a greenback, which was proper US federal, you know, he was actually creating that. That wasn't bankers creating that. And the other one that was going to do it was JFK. He was planning to take the power of creating money away from the private banks. And it was unfortunate that he got shot before he had actually written the executive order, which meant it should have actually gone ahead even after he was shot. But no, they couldn't have that. Now, whether it was a coincidence, I'll leave that to you to believe. But what we actually said, well, first thing you can do with banks, it's quite interesting that they don't tend to pursue the debts for very long at all. They'll give you a default notice, and then what they do, they'll sell it to debt collectors. Well, that's quite bizarre, isn't it? Because if they sell your debt and someone else buys it, surely it's now their debt. Because they've just paid off your debt. Okay, they got it at a really good discount, but then the debt collectors come after you and actually want the whole, that's how they make their money, by the way. They want the whole lot back. Well, I think this is fraud. And so what I do, if I get a letter from a debt collector, and I can't be bothered to do, you know, we've got letters that do deal with it, but if you're really lazy and you want a really quick fix, you can actually send back this, we got this sticker that goes on, you know, you can print off the website. Basically says, no contract, return to sender. I do not recognise you, I do not understand your intent, and it says a few other legal things as well. But what it is like, how can somebody else buy your debt and then pursue you for the money? And I sort of got this when, you know, when I ended up in debt, and there'd be one bank account that was, I can remember that it was about £5,000. It was a credit card, I think, or something like that, and I simply could not pay it back. And then, you know, one, you know, debt collector gave up with it, and then another debt collector got hold of it, but by this time it was like getting on for £10,000. And I was saying, well, what's going on here? I thought this is a bit strange. And that's when I started looking into money and how money was created. And in the end, I said, well, unless you can actually show me the accounting, then I don't owe you anything. And so, you know, people say, well, why didn't you pay it back? I can remember a lady at my meditation group, she actually said to me, well, I can't believe, you know, what you do, because I go to a spiritual church. This is what she was saying. She said, I go to a spiritual church, and the first thing we've got to understand is personal responsibility. And I said, well, I take my personal responsibility very seriously. I do. And it's my responsibility to actually educate people about this fraud which is going on. Because I think modern banking is fraud. And I think it's a way of taking wealth from the, we'll call it the 99%. I think it's much bigger than that. But it's a way of taking away our, you know, basically it's our labour and our resources and scooping them off to the top. And all these cuts, that's just going to get more money going back to the top layer of banks. And I think there are people at the top layer that their wealth is way beyond what you'll ever see in the Times 100 rich list. And I know for a fact the Times 100 rich list is complete fantasy, complete fantasy. It's what, you know, those people are way down the ladder actually say, you know, is crazy. But anyway. And debt collectors, you know, buy the debt from the, you know, from the banks for 10p. Well, why can't we buy our debt for 10p and cut out the middleman? Because, you know, we'd have a chance of paying it back then if it was only, you know, paying a tenth. But of course the banks haven't lost anything, because of course they created it on a computer. So what we're basically, I'm just going to shoot through this really quickly, but on the website, so if there is anyone, or if you know anyone that's really having problems, and it's now a sort of large community website where the information is actually shared and there's a lot of people supporting each other, but we actually ask them for an invoice, basically. Or if we owe you money, can you invoice me? Because anyone that's had a business, you know that, you know, if anyone wants to make a demand on you, you know, for money, they'll invoice you under the Bill of Exchange Act. They won't do this. You also ask it for in your name, which isn't like Mr. or Mrs. or just your name. Just, you know, my name's Jonathan of the family Witterick, okay? But no, there's got to be Mr. or capitalisation, which I think is, and that's something you can look into. If you look at on YouTube for Meet Your Straw Man, it explains it very simply, very quickly. But I haven't got time to go into that. We also ask for proof of a lawful contract. Now, when you got a credit card, you signed it, didn't you? On an application form. But it's very rare that the banks, for credit cards anyway, that the bank actually signs it. So, for anyone knows anything about contract law, which has never been repealed, and it's the basis of how we do exchange goods and services all around the world, under contract law, there has to be some, you know, two signatures, because otherwise it's a unilateral contract, and a unilateral contract is not binding in law. So we ask for, you know, proof of lawful contract. The other thing, of course, is for a contract to be lawful, there needs to be consideration. That is something of value. Now, if they created the money on a computer keyboard, effectively, they've given you nothing of value. And the way I look at this is, if I lent you somebody here £10,000, okay, and the last £50 note you were spending, somebody said, I can't have that. It's that's been printed on a Epsom print, you know, inkjet. Look, the ink runs when it gets wet. Would you pay back somebody that had given you counterfeit money? And this is, I believe, what the banking system is doing. It's creating money out of thin air and then charging us. And this is why we've got the problems we have today. And this is why, you know, with the technology we've got with computers, and certainly with third world countries producing, you know, really cheap goods, we should be absolutely loaded, but we're not. Everyone's broke. I believe that money was never intended to be a commodity in itself. It was a means of exchange where we could swap things, we could swap our labour, we could swap our resources with each other. But it's been turned into this commodity where the richest people are the ones playing about with what is effectively our labour. So I'm just going to shoot through because I don't want to run over, and I would like to take some questions at the end and sort of open up the debate a little bit. But what we basically do with the letters, we give them 10 days to respond. And if they can't give us proof of contract and show us where they got the money from and everything else, then we say, well, I'm sorry, but we're not paying you. And what we also do is, you know, with debt collectors, because we believe they are third-party interlopers, we start charging them for our time. Because my time's actually quite valuable. And I think certainly when I'm here and talking with other people, I think it's quite valuable time. However, what we do, we'll start charging them, because if the debt collector can't actually show that you know, there's actual lawfully binding debt, what we do, we start charging them. We actually say, we'll actually charge them 3 times what they're trying to get off us. And we charge them £1,000 an hour, or part thereof, for talking to them on the phone, and yeah, a number of other things. So what we do, we start charging them, and then we send them an invoice. And this works, this honestly works, because the debt collectors get really scared, because they'll be chasing us for, say, £5,000, and after a few letters and phone calls, and 3 times the original thing, you'll be chasing them for, say, £50,000, £60,000. You know, so, you know, we have a bit of fun with it. And the other thing is that they really take away our power, because when they phone us, you know, debt collectors, when they phone us up, anyone knows a bit about transactional analysis, they'll be like a critical parent, and they'll say, right, are you so-and-so? And immediately we tend to go into child mode, and we go, oh, well, I'm in debt, and I'm sort of like really disempowered, and we say, oh, yes, well, I'm really sorry, I'm going to try and pay it back. And I used to really get intimidated by these guys. But once I found out a few things about how they, you know, how the whole system works, what I would do is, initially, when I, you know, still hadn't got a lot of confidence, initially what I'd do is say, oh, just one moment. They say, it's Jon Witterick there. They'd say, just one moment. And what I'd do, I'd put the phone down, and I'd make sure I'd have Radio 3 playing, and I'd just put the phone down, and I'd just creep away very, very quietly. And then, you know, after about 3 minutes, you know, they'll probably sort of hang up by then. So just before, you know, 2.5, 3 minutes, come back and say, oh, just one, you still there? Yeah, just one moment, and just creep away. And you can do it 3 or 4 times, and you can hold them on the phone for about 15 minutes, which is time that they could be spending, you know, chasing other people. So you're saving other people. And then what I'd do is ask them, oh, it's great. And suddenly my confidence started coming back. You know, it's like once I realised the whole thing is a scam, I started really empowering. And, you know, so what I did, and what I really, you know, what I really started doing, and it really pissed them off, but I was always very polite to them, very polite. So what I do, I'd answer the phone and say, oh, hello, how can I help you today? And, oh, no, and they say, it's Jon Witterick there, you know, so it's Moorcroft Debt Recovery. I'd say, oh, right, okay, well, you're phoning me, so what I'm going to do is ask you some simple security questions. I want to know your full name, I want your line manager's name, I want your direct telephone number, your mobile number. That was always a bit tricky, but you can always try. And you know, what's great is that, you know, you get a bit of it, and I'd write this information down. So next time there'd be someone else phone up, and you say, oh, right, and your line manager, is it so-and-so? And they say, yes, and your direct line, it must be 7684, and ask for the last few digits, you know. And suddenly, oh, and the last one I'd always get, what is your mother's maiden name? That's always a favourite. And it's sort of, what was happening is the dynamic was going from me being in child mode, you know, and critical parent being in charge, to me actually standing in my own power and challenging them. And, you know, it was very empowering. It was really good fun as well. So it's just a dynamic of how you actually deal with this. And the same with the police. Always be polite. Always, you know. But, you know, some people get angry, or, you know, whatever. Don't. Just like, but come back to them as an adult and say, oh, really, officer? And they say, you know, and we know commonly known as Dom. You know Dom, don't you? He's brilliant, and you'll find him if you YouTube commonly known as Dom. He's been hanging about here. I think he's over at UBS at the moment, isn't he? But he's brilliant with policemen, because what he'll do, they say, can you give us your name? I say, yeah, it's Dom. You know, I'm commonly known as Dom, and which is his common law name, effectively, as I'm commonly known as John. So anyway, Dom will say, well, no, your full name. And he'll say, what? The one on my birth certificate? Because he's quite sort of like, you know, he's quite sort of like, he's very quick, he's very funny. And they'll say, I say, yeah, the one on your birth certificate. He said, I can't give you that. I say, that's Crown copyright. It says it on my birth certificate. Yeah, Crown copyright. I say, yeah, I don't own it, so I can't give you that. But so yeah, it's just a change in the dynamic. So general rules. If you're dealing with this, always be truthful, because we're trying to set an example. So always be truthful. Always act politely. Act honourably. That's why I try not to ignore them, because that's not staying in honour. Act lawfully, and most important, don't be greedy. Because somebody could actually go to my website and think, oh, I could go out and get 10 credit cards, and I could buy a Porsche and new clothes and all this. Well, then all you're doing is being like the bankers. It's like Animal Farm, isn't it? You know, where, you know, 4 legs good, 2 legs, well, I can't remember what it was now. It was a long time since I read it. But it's like, we're trying to set an example. So don't use it for greed, because then you're out of balance with the universe. So, but if you've got genuine debt problems and you can't pay it back, then we do offer an alternative. And it's quite interesting, because here we go in the Guardian newspaper, which I was in just recently, but we won't go into that just now. But it was funny, because in 2009, the website had been going for about 18 months, 2 years, and a whole load of debt collectors got together. They have like meetings where they have PowerPoints and a big hotel, and they decided there were 5 websites they wanted permanently removed from the internet, and mine was one of them. And at the time, you know, the website, it took a bit of finding on Google, but after a link to the Guardian newspaper, I went from sort of page 4 or 5 on Google to page 1, and a few months later, actually overtook the actual government debt advice. You know, when you put in get out of debt or, you know, whatever. So it's actually got, it's now a large community with lots of people sharing different ideas. So it's no longer just me, and I can't take responsibility for it anymore. It's just growing and growing. So, right. Oh, and this was another story I liked from the Telegraph. Actually said, downturn hits debt collectors. Apparently, debt collectors are really struggling. You'd think they're doing really well at the moment, wouldn't you? Because there's so much debt. But they're not, because people can't afford to pay this debt off, because the money isn't in circulation to pay off. There isn't the money to pay off. The money isn't in circulation to pay off all the debts. You know, you could explain this to a 10-year-old child and they go, oh yeah, no, there's no way it can be paid off. And it can't. We've got to have a radical rethink of how we do business. So for more details, go out to getoutofdebtfree.org, and there's a lot of support. There's a forum with a lot of support on there as well. So the current debt, the deficit is like how much we're short by in relation to GDP, and our deficit is actually bigger than Greece's. We've got, in the UK, there's the largest deficit in Europe. But because we've got this wonderful city of London, which creates loads and loads of money for the whole world, then, of course, we can afford a great big deficit. Of course, it's us that pays the interest on that. But just trying to work out how big our current debt in this country is 1.1 trillion pounds. We're spending more on paying the interest on that debt than we are in education. So it's costing us more than to pay every school teacher, every university, you know, basically we're spending more on the debt than we are. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. But let's get an idea of how big 1.1 trillion is. Because, you know, what would it look like? Well, there's a £50 note. And there's a wad of £50 notes. £10,000. You can put it in your back pocket and have a really good weekend on that, couldn't you? So, okay, so £10,000 fit in your back pocket. And then, if you get 100 packets of that together, that's £1 million. And that would fit in my rucksack if I took my laptop out, you know. So, you know, you could actually walk around with £1 million in your backpack or in a small, you know, briefcase. So that's a bit more like it. There we go. There's 100 million. It's a pallet load. Because we talk about millions and billions and trillions as if it's just more notes. But when you can actually see that, so there we've got a pallet of, sorry, you can't see that over there. A pallet of £50 notes stacked up is basically 100 million. And then 1 billion is basically 8 pallets of £50 notes. So that's one bit. So when they talk about it, so we can actually get an idea of how big these figures are. So there we got £1 billion. You could fit that in your garage. If you've got a little single garage, you could take the car out and you could get £1 billion in there. That'd be handy, wouldn't you? Well, you know. So what's a trillion look like then? £1 trillion. There we go. That is the area of 1.5 football pitches. And you'll notice, those of you at the front might be able to see, they're actually stacked 2 pallets high. £1 trillion. Anyone see that? That's that little dot down there, that's the man standing next to it. I mean, it is so vast. It is a trillion is just so big. We talk about our debt being 1 trillion. I mean, how did it get that big? And a lot of people say, oh, it was the last Labour government. It's that big because we need that much money being pumped into the system the whole time just to stop it crashing. But it will crash, and it's a mathematical certainty. And I think when it does, that's our opportunity to actually take back control from these fraudulent international bankers. There we go, £1 trillion. Now, just out of interest, 1 trillion grains of sand would weigh 73 tons. It's a big number. And there's a few other things as well, which, you know, it's mad. And as I said before, money was never intended to be a commodity, but it was a way of accounting. And now they've created this, and they're creating money out of thin air, charging us interest, and that should be our labour. That's the way we exchange. And so we're just in a completely mad system where our means of accounting with each other has been hijacked for profit by some very small number of individuals. And I would say fractional reserve banking, this way of creating money when you haven't actually got the deposits, it simply failed us. But people are waking up. And of course, there, you know, there we've got a picture of the Occupy movement in the US. And the fact that everyone's here is because we realise there is a problem and it needs a solution. It's not a crisis, it's a scam. And this financial district is responsible for most of the poverty and suffering on the planet. That's on Wall Street. I would say the same applies to the City of London as well. So, and of course, in Monopoly, we realised that the game of Monopoly can't go on and on and on, and you can't get a stalemate. It always has to end. So when I was referring to Monopoly earlier, the game of Monopoly always ends, because sooner or later, one player always ends up with all the money. And this is what's happening. These financial institutions have gradually taken our money away from, you know, allowing us to use it for exchange. And suddenly, you know, why is there such high unemployment if lots of people want to work and lots of people want to buy things? It's crazy. Oh, it's money. Well, you know, what is a financial, you know, economic downturn? You know, it's when the, you know, the system whereby we exchange goods has failed us. So so the deficit, just to wind up now, the deficit can never be paid back. The cuts simply keep us enslaved. And the monetary system, it's a mathematical certainty that the current financial system has to collapse unless we actually make some really big changes. But there's not enough money in circulation to pay off all the debts. But I think this is a fantastic opportunity. And the way I see it is, when you convert, just really quickly, when you convert, you'll think, what is he talking about now? Well, if you've got a load of barn chickens, right, and they're all there and they're under fluorescent lights and they're walking around in their own crap, and if you want to convert them to free range, all you have to do is open the door. But of course, none of them will go outside because it's scary out there. And you know, when I do talks about the financial system collapsing, the most scared people that come and talk to me afterwards say, well, I've actually got £50,000 in the bank and I'm a little bit nervous about it. I'm saying, well, look, imagine if you're in a prison, right? And you've done really well in prison because you worked in the library and you'd actually saved up 25 quid and it's under your mattress in your cell. And somebody says, the prison walls are collapsing. And you're thinking, oh my God, the prison's collapsing, I'm really worried about it. Well, there's nothing to worry about because I believe that our freedom is going to be at the end of this. And just go back to the chickens, what it takes one or two brave chickens to go through that open door and look outside. I won't do the chicken impression, yeah, whatever. But yeah, one will go out and then another will follow and another will follow. And it's basically, I see our liberation from the corrupt financial system. I believe I believe we're going to be free from it very soon. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to me and thanks for inviting me here today. Thank you very much.